Barbara Giamanco is on a mission to ignite sales transformation. That means helping companies attract more women to their sales teams, providing the support to advance women into sales, and promoting diversity and inclusion across all teams. Barb co-authored The New Handshake, Sales Meets Social Media, the first book written about social selling, and also hosts the popular and award-winning Conversations with Women in Sales podcast. She's here today to discuss one of the greatest opportunities your sales organization has to drive more revenue, and that's improving the prospecting experience. In this Q&A session, Barb will show you how to ditch the pitch and create consistent, focused, and personalized prospecting experiences that lead to more sales meetings and more customers. As Barb says, you only have a few seconds to make a positive impact with your prospects. And if you don't think that's worth your time, you might be in the wrong profession. Joined now by Nutshell's own head of growth, Mike Carroll, let's give a warm welcome to Barb Giamanco.
Hey, Barb.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy Friday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got a lot of questions for you, so I want to kind of jump right in. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I manage the sales team here at Nutshell, and I'm always looking for ways to optimize our process, squeeze every little bit of juice I can out of every part of our funnel. And I'm wondering, you've been teaching a lot of the sales teams lately that the biggest untapped opportunity is improving their prospecting experience. So why do you think that is? Why is prospecting so important?
Well, probably the biggest reason, Mike, I never used to be a person who would do a lot with sports analogies, but I think everybody can relate to this. Recently saw Moneyball again for like the 15th time. And it's just a reminder that if you think about prospecting in terms of the goal is to get on first base, because you have zero chance of ever getting a home run, right? Think of a home run as a closed deal. This is why it's critically important. And I think it's one area of the sales process, especially for those people who are to go outbound on a very regular basis. They're taking a pretty approach to it. And we're going to talk about this more, I think, but numbers aren't the way to get there. It's the quality that gets you on base.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the numbers part a little more. But the one question I was kind of curious about is when you talk about prospecting experience, just to clarify, you don't just mean like that first cold call or that initial touch. So what do you mean? Would you describe the actual prospecting experience? It sounds like it's a little bit more.
It is, and thank you for that question. So I really think about the prospecting experience in two ways. One, there's the experience that buyer or that buying team is having with your company. So there's that organizational prospect experience, if you will. We all know that people are going online to do early stage research. Now, I have some opinions about whether or not sales can come in at that point, and I believe that they absolutely can. But if you think about it, buyers are consumers too. So what do we do when we know we have a problem or something that we feel like we need? We're going to go online. We're going to check social feeds. We're going to ask questions in peer forums, especially when you think about websites. I don't know about you, Mike, but I have gone to website after website after website, and what they say and then what they share, there's this huge inconsistency often. So that's the first piece. There's the organizational experience that somebody goes through. And then you bring it now down to the salesperson. And then it's the individual salesperson who's going human to human. And what does that experience look like? That's where the cold call, the social media outreach, all is coming inbound. How you then handle yourself human to human, because that's who's going to make the buying decisions, right? That's creating an experience as well. And contrary to belief, that experience is starting with that very interaction. In fact, Google called it ZMOT. And that's that zero moment of truth when somebody is saying, do I give this time and attention that I have that's limited to Mike or Barb or John or anybody else who's checking in, or I move on to something else? And then that process, Mike, is happening all throughout the selling, the selling sort of buying cycle, if you will.
So it sounds like you're talking a little bit more about well, it's something, it's kind of near and dear to my heart, which is talking about the sort of like tension that exists between sales and marketing. Because when I hear you talk about websites and the idea that, the experience someone is having from a marketing perspective is not the same from a sales perspective. So what do you think are the most common causes of the subpar prospecting experience? Is it like a lack of communication? Is it a strategy issue? Is it a tactical issue? I'm super curious.
I think it's all of those, actually. This is one of the reasons why, of course, sales and marketing alignment, which is not a new concept. As long as I've been selling, it's been a thing, right? It just becomes more critical because buyers are more discerning and they're a whole lot less patient. I mean, I think about myself as a consumer, and if I need to check out a new product or service, and let's say I call into a call center at a bank and I give them XYZ information. Mind you, I'm a customer, and I give them information, and then they say, "Oh, you need to talk to Mike over in this department." And Mike answers the phone, and Mike asks me all the same darn questions, and or Mike gives me different information than the person before me. So I think that the teams have to work together. It's not just strategy, common goals. I think there needs to be more of an understanding of the real impact that is being made. And there seems to be this disconnect. Look, marketing teams by and large do a great job. They have great content on the web. They have a point of view about what that buyer's journey is, which may or may not be true. And this is one of the reasons why, honestly, I'm kind of bored with the whole concept of buyer's journey, because we're trying to force people into a linear process that fits what the company is selling.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So, my very low tech answer to this: go pretend to be a customer, go pretend to be that buyer you're targeting who's going to do the early stage research and get a sense of what that really feels like. Now, once you do that, now go talk with a salesperson. Are you getting the same consistent message? Are they referring to content you didn't see, or is what they're referring to conflicting with what's on the website? So, we got to stop talking about alignment and actually get down to what is the experience a customer coming into their first interactions with you is like. That's the starting point. And then it's like, how does that carry forward?
Man, I think you and I could probably talk all day about that particular problem. I beat the drum around here quite a bit about the fact that the buying process is not a linear thing. The funnel is not a linear thing. But for our audience, yeah, it's really not, right? I mean, they can bounce from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top or get stuck in the middle. Anyway, like I said, we could go on. I wanted to focus a little bit, though, for our audience, on something that you do that we find really interesting. So you have a set of questions that you send to sales organizations to find out just how consistent a team's sales process is. And because a lot of the time, like we're talking about, the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. SDR team doesn't necessarily know what your AE team is up to all the time, or marketing versus sales. Can you walk through those questions with us so that our audience can hear them?
Yeah. Happy to. And by the way, dare I say it? Sales managers often don't have a pulse on what their sales teams. So, there's all these levels of complication. And so here's what's interesting. I just read Gartner's Q1 Chief Sales Officer report for 2020. And one of the top 3 priorities remains what we're talking about right here: business development and the pipeline activity. So just to get a sense of whether or not a sales leader truly understands what's happening with prospecting and business development in their organization, I asked these questions. You ready for it? Because I spent a lot of time thinking about these, Mike.
I think everyone's going to get their pens out real quick.
Get your pen, right? Write it down.
That's right.
Okay. 1, have your salespeople actually identify the titles of the key stakeholders or economic buyers in the target accounts you are sending them after.
Okay.
Radical, isn't it?
Right.
Number 2, if asked, would sales leaders and sales reps have the same answer to that question? So let's assume that the rep has the answer. Yes, I'm going after line of business buyer, chief revenue officer, and they look like X, and this is what they care about. And I go to Mike, who's my sales leader, and Mike says completely the opposite of what I've just said. Okay. Number 2, what are their names? Do you actually know their names? So not just their role, their title, but do you know their names? And what % of those contacts are actually in CRM? Now, we're in 2020, so that might seem like a really weird question, but the reality is that a lot of sales reps still carry this stuff in their head or in a notebook or in, Evernote, and it's not all in CRM. So that's question number 2. And then number 3 is what's the percentage of those specific target contacts that you said were the most important to you have actually been contacted in the past year? Ask those 3 questions, which I'm telling you, I burned a lot of midnight oil to come up with those, right? It is amazing what happens almost every time I ask a sales leader that question, or I ask a rep, hey, do you know the names and the titles? And if I asked your manager, would they say the same thing? You get crickets. It all of a sudden starts to dawn on them that these basics that they think are just naturally occurring, or that there's a natural understanding, these people are not on the same page. They're just not. And it leads you into a deeper conversation about, well, you got to fix that first, and then you can move on from there.
Yeah, I think too often everybody makes assumptions, and those assumptions tend to filter down through the team that, leaders don't communicate the finer details often enough because they live in their head and they don't interact with their team on a daily basis. I don't know about some sales leaders, but I sit right next to my team. So I don't miss a thing, or even if I wanted to, I couldn't miss a thing. So I think and one thing you also said, which I thought was super interesting, is that even though it's 2020, some sales reps or even leaders are working off of Evernote or spreadsheets. I mean, we see that every day, and it's not an uncommon thing when old school salespeople or even new school salespeople talk about relationships all the time, and they think that's what matters most, and they'd be right, by the way, 100% correct. And I think sometimes the technology gets lost in the shuffle.
Well, I mean, this is another place to just also throw out that I believe that CRM doesn't really do a good job helping you with prospecting. Because you can put the information in the system, and sure, you can outline a few tasks, right, that you need to follow up. I need to email Mike in X number of days. I need to call him back. Let's assume that's all happening the way that it's supposed to. It's really not designed, for the most part, to track the prospecting process, which I believe one of the is people don't think about that front end, that prospecting, as kind of a mini strategy as part of your overall sales strategy. So again, it's an assumption. Yes, we've given them buyer personas. Of course they knew who to call. Yes, of course they know exactly what those people care about. But when you ask the human beings involved, then the real story surfaces.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, my sales team just walked in, so I better watch what I say. But I talk to teams every day that they skew or they obscure the prospecting process even from their CRM. They don't look at it like a process. They only put, as they say sometimes, leads or opportunities, in the CRM. Right. And I'm always advocating, I'm like, no. It's all one long process, and your tactics in the prospecting stage are as important as they are down funnel, because if you don't fill the funnel, then you've got nothing to sell to. So let's key in on that for a second and talk about solutions. So let's say I'm running into these problems. What steps can I take to become more consistent and more focused? What can I do with my team to make sure that we have that strategy, that single process that pulls all the way through from prospecting to qualification to all the way through?
Well, I think the first part of it is just break it out and recognize that you need a mini prospecting strategy, because once again, if one of the top 3 key issues that is plaguing sales leaders and causing them a lot of heartburn, which is, if Gartner says it, I got to believe it's pretty true, right?
Sure.
And it's been consistent for quite a while. So if you know that is a problem, and if you know that people getting, on first base is an issue, stop treating it as if it's not a critical first step in sourcing the right kinds of sales opportunities. So I would say create a little mini prospecting plan that, you're a great process guy, so you probably have some thoughts here too. Then tie the process. What are reps? Do they have the basic understanding of who the target buyer is? Do they really understand 3 key insights about what that role is and what they care about? Do they really know their names? And are they sure that the title reflects who they are as a decision maker? So you've got to insist that the basics are there. And then I think you have to inspect regularly. It needs to go in CRM. And until recently, there really wasn't even a software technology that could kind of tag on and track the prospecting piece of it along with the rest of the process in CRM. But you have to have some way. This is where it gets tough for managers. Managers often are kind of tracking, maybe with spreadsheets. You tell me, Mike, can you go into CRM and reasonably do a search and see all the steps that your reps are taking with the prospecting process. Now, I realize yours is a little different because it starts with a lot of these folks coming inbound, but is that easy to track, or did you have to develop something?
I mean, in nutshell, it is. So I will say that. So yes, I mean the way that we've designed Nutshell. I don't want to be too product pitchy, but
Well, I'm the one that brought it up and said until recently, so there you go.
Yeah, in fairness. Yes, I mean, I think it is. If you're building a sales process the way that we have it designed in Nutshell, to be able to follow every single stage of the process, have a defined outreach, cadence that each rep can follow within each stage of that process, then your prospecting stage becomes 3 early stages in a longer sales funnel. So I think it's absolutely necessary. And the other component of that, while I'm being a sales guy, I guess, is to be able to track and measure the effectiveness of activities, right? So
Yes.
with Nutshell, you can track the volume of activities, how many phone calls, how many meetings, or any custom activity you want to create. But more importantly, and I love this about Nutshell, and I have to thank the engineering team for this, is that we measure those activities against outcome, which is the most important part, right? Is how much value does that particular activity have? Does an email move somebody through the funnel better than a phone call, or and so on and so forth, a particular type of meeting? So I think it's possible, but not every CRM makes it possible. And a lot of people use a lot of different CRMs.
Absolutely, but they can still be responsible and accountable for creating the kind of process that we're talking about here. And in your case, you have that management oversight. But I think it's taking it more seriously as step number one. I know we're now going to talk about some of the ways that people really kind of step all over themselves when they're making the first attempt. But if you want to get better outcomes, and I'm so glad you just said what you just said, because I've been a broken record for years. Activity is worthless if it doesn't drive a very specific and measurable outcome. And if your number one goal is, and if it isn't, you might want to rethink your job. If your number one goal as a sales development rep is to book sales meetings, if your activity is not doing that, something is wrong with the activity, and more of the same is not going to be. And so thank you for saying that, because I say that and people look at me like, oh yeah, we get that. But they just go back to, well, we'll just make 50 more phone calls every day, and that'll be the answer. No, the problem is the quality of the activity and the method I talk about.
Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit, because I think you're absolutely right. And I think the people that can benefit from this the most are, your frontline, sales reps, your cold callers, your SDRs. So what's their responsibility? How can they go above and beyond for prospects to create a better experience? Because you and we talked yesterday about this, and we'll dig into this in a little bit in the next question, but what can they do to make that a better experience? Whether it's cold emails, LinkedIn email things, it's often awful, and it doesn't have to be.
Well, when I got the suggested questions, which were fantastic, thank you, Ben. Big shout out to you, buddy. When I got the questions and I saw that, what's their responsibility? If you want to be a rock star salesperson, you own it, people. That end of story. Doesn't matter who. I am obviously opinionated about some things, but it's also based on experience. I've sold I've sold every level of sales to every type of business. I've worked for major organizations like Microsoft, running a $400 million business. I have a little experience here. And here's the thing. You cannot wait for your employer to make your success happen. So what is their responsibility? You own it, regardless of whether or not you get training, support, anything else going on inside. So I feel like today it's even more critical for learners, people to be learning. They have to have this learning mindset. Learners are earners, Mike. It's a reality.
Absolutely.
It also makes you much more interesting and able to converse with various customer and prospect types. But ultimately, you can't wait for your employer. And today there's no excuse. We have events like Boundless, for goodness sakes, where we're giving you all kinds of gold. And if you're not taking advantage of that, I don't know, rethink where you're at in life.
I couldn't agree more. I would take curiosity and passion over experience almost any day, because the world changes so quickly that if you're not learning, you're going to fall behind immediately. But go ahead, please.
Well, what I was going to say is, people ask me all the time, they say, well, Barb, you're always talking about books. So I usually read about 60 books a year. It's my thing. I really enjoy reading. And now there's a trend with mini books, so you can read even more. But people ask me, why do you do that? Like, why do you sit on sales? Why do you listen in on? I sat in on a really great session John Barrows did with a couple of other folks about a week or so ago. Why do you sit in on these things? You've been selling for a long time. Yes, and the world keeps changing. I want to remain relevant. Number two, I want to hear what people are talking about. What's interesting? Where are they challenged? I love hearing from the younger folks getting into their sales career for the first time. So if you think that you've reached a certain point and you know it all, you might as well just retire. I'm just saying.
So I want to back it up a little bit because we did talk about this yesterday, like during our, our testing thing,
Yeah.
and it's a part of. So my favorite thing that you say is ditch the pitch.
Yes.
It's my favorite thing. When we talk about sales here at Nutshell, we talk about consultation, we talk about helping. We don't talk about pitching. It's just really not really what we do. That we do have the luxury of our leads being inbound and then being in trial, and so obviously there's some interest in the software before we even start having that conversation. But can you talk a little bit about how both sales leaders, managers, and frontline reps can be better at personalization, can be better at ditching the pitch? What do you like?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I think the first thing, it means you need to stop selling. Okay. What I mean by that is we all have quotas. I run a business. I need to pay my mortgage. I need to feed my dog. I mean, and buyers are not, we're sellers. It's okay, right? So I think it's a shift in the mentality. Now, this has always been my approach. I believe being great in sales means you genuinely care about helping your customers and prospective customers solve problems. And I approach every opportunity with a hashtag give first mentality. So I don't, congratulate myself when somebody says, oh, sure, I'll talk to you for a couple minutes, and use that to like swoop in and tell them everything all about me. No, what I'm doing is I'm using that curiosity you just talked about. And plus I'm prepared, but I'm asking questions about, why are we having this conversation? If somebody approaches me and says, hey, we've heard about this digital selling, social selling thing. We'd like to talk to you about that. And I'll get on the phone with them and I'll say, well, why do you think you need that? What is the problem? And so personalization doesn't have to be difficult if you set aside your agenda for a moment and keep in mind that people buy from people.
Yes.
So if you care about helping them solve a problem, you both win. It's just that somehow this mentality of, I got to pitch at every cost. If they say hello, I'm going to pitch them on my product. No, actually, your obligation, if you really care about doing well, is to figure out how you can be of service to them. Now, again, like my earlier 3 questions, I did not stay up all night thinking these things through. Greats like Zig Ziglar, Napoleon Hill, and many, many others talk about that if you care about the other person first genuinely, and you find opportunities to show them that you care, then they're going to be genuinely interested in talking to you.
I love that. One of the things that we do even on the marketing side at Nutshell is create what we call honest broker content, where we actually review competitive software, leveraging our own expertise, because obviously we're in the space. And
Sure.
Our sales team here is totally permitted, by the way, if there's a better solution for someone you're talking to, tell them about it. First and foremost, we always want to help people. So I love that. Gittimer is probably rolling over around in his studio right now hearing me say this, but but you and I are on the same page when it comes to selling. The art of selling without selling, I think, is the only way to do it. It's all about being consultative, helpful, and creating that connection.
Well, and here's the thing, even to your point, I remember vividly, I started inside sales at Ingram Micro, right? And they were back in the day, just getting started and whatnot. And I remember vividly talking with a potential customer, and it was a fairly sizable deal opportunity, sizable in the day. Like in that day, $25,000 was like a really big deal, right?
Sure.
So I'm talking with this buyer. I'm not saying it's not today, but just to give some context, talking with this buyer, and it becomes really, and I was working for a distributor who had lots of different products, but I just, based on what I knew about the problem, what they really wanted to try and solve for, we just were not able to help them. And I made some recommendations and actually pointed them to another distributor. Now, guess what? unbeknownst to me, my manager is standing behind me listening to me.
Oh, no.
The second I got off the phone, he was all up in my grill and he was not happy. And he said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Well, what's better, doing the right thing for the customer or taking the order, ticking them off, having a return, and have all this other stuff going on?" So the end of the story, 6 months later, Mike, this guy came back to me and he said, "You know what? I never forgot that you did that for me. And now here's what I need." That company became a $2 million business for me over the course of 5 years.
I love it. It's a long game. Got to play the long game.
And you do have to go a little bit short and a little bit long. But look, when you do right by people, they do not forget. And when you screw them over, they do not forget.
So I want to switch gears a little bit because, like you said
Sure.
earlier, I am a process guy. And so I do believe in the numbers, and metrics are a big thing that I leverage, obviously, to optimize both our sales and marketing here at Nutshell. But so that's the traditional view of prospecting, right? That it's a numbers game. You're moving the penny stack, you're making the calls, you're putting in the time. It's a grind. Do you think that's still true to have success, or do you think that still holds up?
Only if the quality of the activity, right, is behind it. So I have done these in programs with customers, like straight up. I've said, okay, well, you call 100 people, and I'm going to call 50. Or email 100, and I'm going to email 50. And I'm going to take the approach of not making a pitch about your product. I'm going to zero in on the one thing that I need. This target buyer for you, Chief Revenue Officer, is bothered by, and how I think we might be able to help if they're willing to chat for a few minutes. Every single time I win, I end up booking 20 to 25% more conversations than they do. So it's only a numbers game. If it's a quality number you're going after with the quality and activity to back it up. That's it, period. If you're just going to smile and dial 100 calls every day, good luck with that, because I know what your pipeline looks like at the end of the month.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's zero.
Big fat bagel Noonan. That's right. So I actually had a question from one of our audience members. It's a slightly off topic. Yeah. So Heather asks, championing women in sales is one of your big passions. How are you seeing? Yeah, which is awesome, by the way. How are you seeing companies provide the path and support to advance women in sales leadership? Or are they at all?
Well, I think that we're starting to see a lot of progress. I'm very, I'm kind of impatient. So I would have thought we would have seen more progress over the past 20 years or so. But again, like so many things, Mike, it is multifaceted, right? There's a couple things. Women, if they're interested in leadership, they need to make sure that they're expressing that to their immediate manager and people around them. And so I think awareness has become really important in terms of women in sales at all levels, including leadership. And I have found that as more organizations have really understood that there is a business reason for diversifying your sales organization, including more women, but just being diverse overall. First of all, women on sales teams drive more revenue. The revenue tends to be much more profitable. These are facts. You can look them up. Gartner, CEB, you name it, they've got it. Forrester, Frost and Sullivan. The other thing is, if you think about it, customer experience is a big deal, right? Most companies, I got to believe, including Nutshell, have a diverse client set. So having diversity on your teams who can relate to people is really, really important. It's still a little bit slow going, but organizations are really starting to understand that, it is important to balance the scales, because they all kind of key off each other. If you don't have enough women in sales leadership, then it gets tough to attract women because they don't see the path for growth. So multiple, but I also would be remiss if I don't say again, ladies, if you're interested in moving into management, don't assume people know. Speak up.
I love it. My sister's in sales, actually, and she's been killing it lately. And so I hope she's watching today to listen in on that. Okay, so actually, we ran out of questions, but I have one more question I wanted to ask you, and then I want to kick it to you and see if you've got anything you want to leave our audience with. I kind of wanted to, we talked about it yesterday. We had so much fun. Tell me a little bit about your personalization pet peeves. I think when people hear the word personalization, they think of, bracket, first name, end bracket, and if I have that person's first name, then great. It's going to show up in their inbox, and now all of a sudden I've been personal. And that's just really not the case. And you had some awesome things to say about it yesterday, so I kind of wanted you to chime in on that. What drives you nuts?
This would be a great place for us to probably wind it down and close it out. People they want one or the other, right? Oh, it's all personalization, and I'll just put in Mike's name, and I'll just say a sentence about Mike, and woohoo, and that's personalization. On the other side, I'm going to spend forever trying to research every single individual, and I just don't have time to do that. Well, guess what? There's a middle ground. So personalization to me is block certain insights, concerns, competitive challenges, whatever, for certain roles and industries that you are targeting. And you can come up with kind of a little boilerplate. And by the way, a book called You've Got 8 Seconds. You don't have 30 seconds to make your point verbally or in email. So you can do a little homework and get the insight. But what you're referring to is, I cannot stand this. So personalization needs to be authentic. I mean, I'd be rich if I had $1 for every time somebody came to me and said, Barb, I love your book. And then they say a couple more things. I'm like, you didn't even read the abstract on Amazon. Okay. Or I get, oh my gosh, I love your podcast. Really? What do you love about it? And my favorites are the men who approach me. No disrespect, guys, because I got a lot of male listeners on the podcast. But my favorites are saying, I love your podcast and I'd be a great guest. Do you know the title of the podcast? Right? So the point is, you can find a sentence or two and make it more personal. Like with Ben, I know Ben loves his dog, right? I've seen him in the pictures. I'm a dog lover. Maybe you start there. If you're going to approach me and say you like the podcast, what episode? What did you like? What did it mean for you? And that's where I think it breaks down. So if you do the batch work and you've got kind of the guts of that role, now take a minute or two and go to LinkedIn and see if they've got an Instagram or whatever. For gosh sakes, be a bit of a human. And we started off with the quote, right? If you don't think these things are important, seriously, get another job.
I love that you say human. I think that's the most important thing. I think people forget that, we've all been living in a world where people are being sold to constantly, all day long, every day, through every single channel they engage, on their TV, at home. And all they're asking for is a little bit of leeway and a little bit of human connection. And if you just take that little moment to find that, then you'll be well on your way. Barb, I can't thank you enough for being here. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with? Any last pearl of wisdom?
I think we've covered it. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to you and Ben and the Nutshell team for allowing me to kind of step in. It was unexpected, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity. And I know Sujan, and he's amazing. You're going to want to check out his content, and I'm definitely hoping that he feels better. So that's it from me. If you want to know more about prospecting or my thoughts on it, I'm not shy. Feel free to reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.